Outsmarting people does not begin with clever words, hidden tactics, or intellectual tricks. It begins with understanding how human behavior actually works under pressure. Most people believe dominance comes from being louder, faster, or more aggressive, but behavioral psychology shows the opposite. True dominance is quiet. It is rooted in awareness, restraint, and timing. The person who understands the emotional and psychological drivers beneath behavior is already several moves ahead, without needing to announce it. Power is rarely taken by force. It is usually handed over to the person who seems most grounded, most controlled, and most difficult to unsettle. Human beings are predictable, even when they believe they are not. We are driven by needs for validation, certainty, status, and safety. These needs shape our reactions more than logic ever does. When someone feels threatened, their ego speaks. When they feel uncertain, their emotions escalate. When they feel ignored, they over-explain. The individual who recognizes these patterns can step out of emotional reactions and into strategic observation. Outsmarting begins the moment you stop reacting and start reading the situation instead of trying to win it. Most people give away their position without realizing it. They talk too much, justify themselves too quickly, and rush to prove value. This behavior is not confidence. It is insecurity disguised as effort. Calm people do not need to convince. Grounded people do not need approval. When you allow others to reveal themselves through their words, tone, and body language, you gain information without giving any away. Information asymmetry is power. The less you reveal about your internal state, the more control you maintain over the interaction. One of the first rules of psychological dominance is understanding that emotions are contagious, but discipline is rare. People mirror energy unconsciously. If you remain calm when others are emotional, you disrupt their rhythm. They expect resistance, fear, or submission. They do not expect stillness. Calmness forces others to adjust to you. This is why experienced negotiators, interrogators, and leaders regulate their breathing and tone before they speak. They know that whoever controls the emotional temperature controls the direction of the exchange. Power dynamics shift constantly in conversation. They are influenced by who asks the questions, who fills silence, and who sets the pace. Silence, in particular, is one of the most underused tools of dominance. People are uncomfortable with silence because it forces self-awareness. When you pause instead of responding immediately, you create psychological pressure. The other person often fills the space by revealing more than they intended. Silence communicates confidence, not confusion, when it is paired with steady presence. Outsmarting is not about superiority. It is about positioning. You position yourself by choosing when to speak, when to listen, and when to disengage. Many people believe winning means overpowering others verbally, but verbal dominance often exposes desperation. Strategic thinkers know when to let others feel like they are leading while subtly guiding outcomes. Influence works best when it feels like choice, not control. When people believe they arrived at a conclusion themselves, resistance disappears. Another critical rule is recognizing ego signals. Ego is fragile, and fragile things overreact. When someone interrupts frequently, name drops, dismisses others, or insists on being right, they are signaling insecurity. You do not challenge ego head-on unless necessary. You let it exhaust itself. Ego-driven individuals defeat themselves by overplaying their hand. Your role is simply to observe, remain composed, and respond only when it benefits you. Patience outperforms aggression every time. Situational awareness is the foundation of all strategic intelligence. This means noticing shifts in tone, posture, pacing, and energy. Humans communicate more through nonverbal cues than words. A tightened jaw, a forced laugh, a sudden change in breathing. These are tells. When you are emotionally regulated, your mind has the bandwidth to notice these details. When you are reactive, you miss them entirely. Emotional control is not suppression, it is clarity under pressure. Most people think dominance requires constant assertion. In reality, dominance is often established by restraint. When you do not chase validation, people notice. When you are not eager to be liked, you are respected. This does not mean being cold or dismissive. It means being self-contained. You carry your certainty internally rather than demanding it externally. Self-mastery communicates safety and authority at the same time, which is why people naturally defer to those who possess it. Another overlooked aspect of outsmarting others is understanding motivation. People are always acting in their perceived self-interest, even when it appears irrational. Fear, pride, desire, and insecurity drive decisions far more than logic. When you understand what someone wants to protect or obtain, their behavior makes sense. You do not argue against their position, you address the underlying need. This shifts conversations from conflict to influence without force. Outsmarting also requires knowing when not to engage. Not every situation deserves your energy. Strategic dominance includes selective withdrawal. Walking away at the right moment preserves power. People often chase closure or validation, weakening their position. When you leave calmly and without explanation, you create unanswered questions. This keeps psychological leverage on your side. Absence, when intentional, can be more powerful than presence. The strongest individuals are not reactive because they are not easily provoked. Provocation is a test of control. Anyone can react. Few can remain centered. When someone tries to bait you emotionally, they are attempting to shift the power dynamic. If you refuse the invitation, the attempt fails. Emotional discipline is not passive, it is active restraint. You choose not to give others access to your internal state. Understanding power also means recognizing that dominance does not require domination. Ethical intelligence is knowing how to protect yourself without diminishing others. Arrogance creates enemies. Confidence creates boundaries. When you maintain respect while holding firm, you establish authority without resistance. People may not like your boundaries, but they will adapt to them if they are consistent. At the psychological level, people trust what feels stable. Inconsistent behavior creates anxiety. Consistent calm creates safety. This is why emotionally regulated individuals often become leaders even without trying. Others orient around them because they provide predictability in uncertain environments. Stability is a form of dominance that does not need to announce itself. Finally, the first stage of outsmarting anyone is mastering yourself. Without self-awareness, every strategy fails. If your emotions control you, others can control you. If your ego needs validation, others can manipulate you. Self-mastery closes these openings. When you know your triggers, values, and limits, you become difficult to influence against your will. This is not about winning against others. It is about not losing yourself in the process. The person who understands human behavior, remains emotionally disciplined, and observes before acting is already ahead. Outsmarting is not a performance. It is a posture, and it begins quietly, internally, long before anyone else realizes what is happening. The next level of dominance is emotional discipline, because perception is shaped by who controls their internal state under pressure. Most people believe they are rational, yet their decisions are driven by emotional impulses they barely recognize. When emotions rise, intelligence drops. This is not a judgment, it is a biological reality. Stress narrows perception, ego distorts interpretation, and fear accelerates poor decisions. The individual who trains themselves to stay emotionally steady gains access to clearer thinking while others lose it. That clarity becomes an invisible advantage. Emotional discipline begins with slowing down your internal responses. You do not rush to interpret tone, assume intent, or personalize behavior. You create a pause between stimulus and response. That pause is where power lives. It allows you to choose your reaction instead of being dragged by instinct. People who lack this pause are predictable. They react the same way every time, which makes them easy to influence. When your reactions are controlled, your behavior becomes harder to read and harder to manipulate. Perception is shaped not by what happens, but by how you frame what happens. Two people can experience the same situation and walk away with entirely different conclusions. One feels attacked, the other feels informed. One feels diminished, the other feels clarified. The difference is emotional regulation. When you stop attaching your self-worth to outcomes, you see reality more accurately. You are no longer defending an identity, you are analyzing information. This shift alone elevates your strategic awareness. Most conflicts escalate because someone feels disrespected. Respect, however, is subjective and ego-driven. When your sense of self is stable, you do not demand constant reinforcement from others. You do not read neutral behavior as hostility. You do not escalate to protect pride. This makes you dangerous in the best possible way because you are not fighting imaginary battles. You conserve energy for moments that actually matter. Another core rule is mastering your facial expressions and body language. Humans read nonverbal cues instinctively. A raised eyebrow, a tightened jaw, a restless posture, all of these leak information about your internal state. When others can read your discomfort or excitement, they gain leverage. Calm posture, steady eye contact, relaxed shoulders, and controlled breathing signal composure. You are telling the room, without words, that you are not rattled. People respond to that energy before they process your words. Tone matters more than content. You can say almost anything if your tone is grounded and neutral. Emotionally charged tones provoke defensiveness. Calm tones invite listening. When you lower your voice slightly instead of raising it, people lean in instead of pushing back. This is not submission, it is control. Leaders and negotiators use this instinctively. They regulate their tone because they know it regulates others. One of the most powerful psychological skills is reframing. Reframing does not deny reality. It changes the lens through which reality is interpreted. Instead of seeing resistance as opposition, you see it as hesitation. Instead of seeing criticism as attack, you see it as data. This prevents emotional hijacking. When others expect you to react defensively and you respond thoughtfully, you shift the dynamic instantly. Confusion replaces aggression. Curiosity replaces hostility. People often try to dominate by controlling outcomes, but true control lies in controlling interpretation. If you control how you interpret events, others lose the ability to destabilize you. Insults lose power. Delays lose urgency. Pressure loses intensity. Emotional resilience is not about being unaffected. It is about being unmovable. You still feel, but you do not spiral. Another critical element of perception is understanding projection. People project their fears, insecurities, and intentions onto others unconsciously. Accusations often reveal more about the accuser than the accused. When someone calls you manipulative, weak, arrogant, or selfish without evidence, they are often revealing an internal struggle. If you take these projections personally, you surrender power. If you recognize them as psychological signals, you gain insight. You stop defending and start observing. Dominant individuals do not rush to correct misunderstandings. Sometimes letting others misinterpret you temporarily works in your favor. When you constantly clarify, explain, and justify, you expose insecurity. Silence allows perception to settle. It also forces others to sit with their assumptions. Over time, reality corrects false narratives more effectively than arguments ever could. Emotional mastery also means tolerating discomfort. Many people speak too quickly because silence makes them uneasy. They overcommit because uncertainty feels threatening. They agree prematurely because conflict feels unsafe. When you train yourself to sit with discomfort, you stop making weak decisions. You can say, "I need time," without guilt. You can pause without apologizing. You can hold boundaries without hostility. Your emotional discipline influences how others treat you. People test limits unconsciously. They push slightly to see what they can get away with. If you react emotionally, they learn where your weak spots are. If you remain calm and firm, they adjust. Boundaries are not enforced by aggression. They are enforced by consistency. You do not need to explain your standards repeatedly. You embody them. Another underestimated skill is selective vulnerability. Emotional intelligence does not mean emotional exposure. Sharing everything weakens your position. Sharing strategically builds trust without sacrificing control. You choose what to reveal and when. You do not use emotions to bond prematurely. This prevents others from using your openness against you. Emotional depth paired with discretion is strength. Perception is also shaped by how you respond to pressure. Pressure reveals character faster than comfort. When situations become tense, most people either become rigid or reactive. If you remain fluid, you stand out. You adapt without losing composure. This makes others uncertain about how to push you, which subtly shifts power in your direction. It is important to understand that emotional dominance is not coldness. Coldness creates distance, but it also creates distrust. Emotional mastery allows warmth without weakness. You can be kind without being naive. You can be empathetic without being absorbent. You feel without carrying what does not belong to you. This balance makes people feel seen while preventing them from crossing boundaries. Your perception of yourself shapes every interaction. If you internally see yourself as needing approval, you will unconsciously seek it. If you see yourself as grounded and self-sufficient, others will sense it. Self-concept leaks through behavior. You cannot fake internal stability for long. This is why self-work matters more than surface tactics. Strategy without self-mastery collapses under stress. Outsmarting others at this level is less about doing and more about not doing. You do not rush. You do not overreact. You do not take things personally. You do not explain unnecessarily. These omissions create space. In that space, clarity forms. Others reveal their intentions, emotions, and weaknesses simply by filling the silence you leave behind. As your emotional discipline strengthens, you become less predictable. People cannot easily read whether you are impressed, offended, threatened, or excited. This ambiguity is not deception. It is containment. You keep your internal state yours. The less reactive you are, the more others adjust around you. This is quiet dominance. Eventually, you realize that perception is not something you fight for. It is something you allow to unfold. You cannot control what others think, but you can control how much access they have to your emotional world. When access is limited, influence decreases. When influence decreases, freedom increases. At this stage, you are no longer trying to outsmart anyone actively. You are simply no longer easy to influence. That alone shifts every interaction. People approach you differently. Conversations slow down. Respect increases, and without effort, you find yourself operating from a position of calm authority that does not need to prove itself. This prepares you for the final level of dominance, where strategy becomes ethical, precise, and intentional. Not to manipulate or overpower, but to navigate human dynamics intelligently. Because the highest form of control is not making others do what you want. It is knowing exactly when to act, when to wait, and when to walk away without losing yourself in the process. At the highest level, psychological strategy becomes less about influence and more about alignment. You are no longer trying to bend people to your will or outmaneuver them for advantage. You are choosing positions, conversations, and relationships that align with your values and long-term objectives. This is where intelligence replaces impulse. You act deliberately, not emotionally. You understand that control is not proven through confrontation, but through discernment. You do not need to win every interaction. You need to choose the ones that matter. Ethical strategy begins with intention. If your intention is ego, domination turns into arrogance. If your intention is clarity, strategy becomes precision. People can sense intent even when they cannot articulate it. When your actions are grounded in self-respect rather than superiority, resistance decreases. Others may not always agree with you, but they recognize consistency and internal coherence. That recognition builds credibility, which is far more powerful than fear or intimidation. One of the most effective strategic principles is letting people experience the consequences of their own behavior. You do not lecture, threaten, or warn excessively. You allow reality to teach the lesson. When someone crosses a boundary, you respond proportionally and then disengage. You do not over-explain or dramatize. This communicates strength without hostility. People learn quickly when actions are met with calm consequences instead of emotional reactions. Strategic intelligence also means understanding timing. Knowing what to say is less important than knowing when to say it. Words delivered too early are ignored. Words delivered too late are irrelevant. When you wait for the moment when others are receptive, your influence multiplies. Timing is not manipulation. It is respect for psychological readiness. You do not force insight, you allow it to land. Another key rule is refusing to underestimate others while also refusing to overestimate them. Some people appear confident but are internally unstable. Others seem quiet but are deeply observant. When you assume too much, you lose accuracy. Strategic thinkers stay curious. They test assumptions slowly. They do not reveal their full hand until they understand the terrain. This restraint prevents unnecessary conflict and protects long-term positioning. Outsmarting without arrogance requires humility. Not false humility, but an understanding that you are not immune to error. Overconfidence blinds perception. When you believe you already know, you stop observing. Strategic intelligence requires continuous calibration. You read feedback, notice shifts, and adjust without emotional attachment. Flexibility is a form of dominance because it allows survival and influence across changing environments. A powerful ethical strategy is making others feel respected without surrendering authority. Respect does not mean agreement, it means acknowledging autonomy. When people feel heard, their defensiveness lowers. You can hold firm positions while still validating perspectives. This disarms opposition. People fight less when they feel seen. This is not weakness, it is efficiency. Conflict wastes energy that strategy conserves. Another principle is knowing when transparency strengthens you and when it weakens you. Transparency builds trust when there is mutual respect. It becomes a liability when there is manipulation. Strategic individuals assess character before offering access. You do not share your plans with those who benefit from your failure. You do not expose your vulnerabilities to those who have not earned your trust. Discernment is protection, not paranoia. Power also lies in creating space for others to underestimate you. When you do not announce your intelligence, people relax. They reveal more. They test boundaries. In doing so, they show you exactly who they are. Underestimation is often an advantage if you are patient enough to let it work for you. You do not correct false assumptions prematurely. You let behavior confirm truth. The most refined form of dominance is influence without attachment. You offer perspective, set boundaries, and act with integrity, but you do not cling to outcomes. Attachment creates desperation. Detachment creates freedom. When you are willing to lose what is misaligned, you gain leverage. People sense when you are not afraid to walk away, and they adjust accordingly. Ethical strategy also means understanding that not everyone is meant to be outsmarted. Some people are committed to chaos, conflict, or victimhood. Engaging them drains energy and erodes clarity. Walking away is not defeat, it is wisdom. Strategic dominance includes choosing peace over proving a point. You do not need to win against people who are not playing the same game. At this level, your presence becomes your strategy. You speak less and mean more. You react slower and see further. You listen with intent and respond with precision. You do not chase respect. You command it through consistency. People learn what to expect from you, and that predictability creates trust. Trust is influence that does not require effort. The final realization is that true dominance is internal. If someone can provoke you, they control you. If someone can manipulate your ego, they own your reactions. When you remove these levers, external power struggles lose relevance. You are no longer trying to outsmart anyone. You are simply operating from clarity, discipline, and self-respect. This is the paradox of mastery. The more control you gain over yourself, the less you need to control others. You become difficult to deceive, difficult to provoke, and difficult to pressure. Not because you are defensive, but because you are anchored. Your decisions come from awareness, not emotion. Your influence comes from presence, not force. In the end, dominance is not about standing above others. It is about standing firmly within yourself. When you do, interactions shift, conversations slow, games disappear, and without needing to prove anything, you move through the world with quiet authority, strategic intelligence, and an unshakable sense of self that no one can take from you.